Well, you may not be completely happy with where Tennessee ended up in the first round of the college football playoff, but we can't say that it's a surprise. And at least you're not Alabama. Go ahead and click that like and subscribe button. Be a part of the program now as we're with you. The Last Look brought to you by Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. We'll take a look at the bracket. Tennessee will play in Columbus in a first-round game. Caleb, that's not a surprise. I think it would have been more surprising had there been some sort of shakeup at the top because of those teams that are involved in conference championship games. So I'm not saying this is the way that it'll be forever, but I think we saw clearly that the college football playoff committee did not want to penalize a team that lost a conference championship game. Be it right or wrong, I think that's what they were trying to say.
Yeah, that's exactly what they were trying to say. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know how I feel about it still. I can go both ways. I don't think you should be punished for going to the conference championship game, but, we'll talk about SMU and Alabama for a minute. If you look at SMU's resume, the conference championship game should have been necessary for them to win because of how bad their resume is. So the sin was last week ranking them behind Alabama. I say the same thing with Penn State, and this is what I would say with Tennessee versus Penn State or Tennessee versus Texas. I think there's a strong argument Tennessee deserves home field advantage over a Penn State or Texas when both of those teams have the same number of losses as Tennessee, 0 top 25 wins. Tennessee is 3-1 versus top 30 teams. Penn State is 0-2. And I think if your schedule strength is at a certain level, it's not that you should be punished for playing a conference title game. It's that you should need to have to win that conference title game just to boost your resume to begin with, honestly.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and the way you lose, too, I mean, in particular with the SEC championship game, Texas not only loses, but they lose without Carson Beck in the second half playing for Georgia. So that, to me, would all factor in. And you and I talked during halftime of that game, what if this ends up being some sort of Texas blowout? Could that vastly drop Georgia? I don't think that was ever in the cards. I mean, other than them suffering like a dozen serious injuries, I just don't think that was ever in the cards.
I didn't either. And honestly, because of how little I value conference championship games to this point, which, by the way, did you notice they did not show the upper decks at Mercedes-Benz yesterday, Dave? I don't know if you know this. There were some empty seats. But the interesting thing is that I thought Texas was going to go for the win at the very end. It's like, just get this game over with. You don't want to go to overtime when you got a college football playoff to worry about. I was shocked that they actually went for the field goal to tie it up, honestly.
Yeah, I didn't notice the empty seats. I'll take your word for it on that. But I still think the conference championship game matters. You don't, and you're probably going to be right. It's probably going to go the way of a bowl game eventually. But even if it doesn't matter, like in your heart, it's going to matter in your darn wallet, right? So if you're Georgia and you're thinking about making a trip to a college football playoff and you've got this meaningless game, yes, it might be right down the road, but you could probably sell your tickets for $500 a pop. I would certainly understand those Georgia fans that didn't show up. But let's redirect it back to Tennessee. What do you make of the matchup? It's going to be on the road. I found it very interesting during the ESPN broadcast that Kirk Herbstreit, who is as tied into Ohio State as anyone, referenced the fact that crowd could go south. That, to me, is befuddling. But Kirk Herbstreit knows more about that program than I do. Way, way, way more. I mean, to me, if an elimination game is taking place in your stadium, that is not the time to be upset about your coach. But he seems to think that could be the case, which surprises me.
Yeah, that shocked me too. I thought Ohio State would just move past the Michigan game. But, I'll say this in defense of Ohio State and Michigan fans. We think about college football. We think about the South and the SEC and the love and the pageantry and tradition. But I got to be honest, guys, it hits its peak with Ohio State, Michigan. Those two states went to war with each other.
What do you mean hits its peak? What do you mean hits its peak?
I mean that game, no matter how relevant I want the regular season to matter, and no matter how irrelevant I'm worried the regular season will be made, by the expanded college football playoff, Ohio State, Michigan will always carry the same amount of weight because the hatred between those two schools is peak. I think it outweighs every other rivalry in terms of pure hatred in college football, except for maybe Mississippi State and Ole Miss. But who cares? Because Mississippi State and Ole Miss are never actually going to be in contention to go to the playoff. So
I would disagree with that. I think there's about probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 games. I would include Mississippi State and Ole Miss, like you said. I would include Alabama, Auburn. I think there's as much hatred there. And I think Michigan, Ohio State is right up there. But that being said, and I'm not comparing, but Georgia, Auburn is the longest running rivalry. Tennessee, Florida has been an incredible rivalry. So you're right, but you picked the one little bitty gem that the Big Ten has in terms of rivalries.
What I'm saying,
the SEC has rivalries top to bottom.
What I'm saying about Michigan, Ohio State, though, is that's the one. Look, I'll just be honest. If you ask the Tennessee fan, if you ask an Alabama fan, would you rather lose to Auburn and make the college football playoff or beat Auburn and miss the college football playoff? They will actually say we'd rather lose to Auburn and make the college football playoff. The actual championships are more important. For Michigan and Ohio State, that's the one rivalry I can honestly say winning that regular season game is more important than your actual success in the postseason. And you know this, Dave. John Cooper got fired because he couldn't beat Michigan, even though he was winning championships left and right at Ohio State at the time. It didn't matter. And Tennessee, 2004, they beat Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, but 97, they won the SEC title. So you're taking the 97 team, even though they lost to Florida. So I think Ohio State fans, I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't think they care if they don't. I don't think they care about this playoff. I think they're so mad about losing to Michigan a 4th year in a row that they would rather tank and Ryan Day get fired. And I think that's great news for Tennessee. One, Ohio State, as Kirk Herbstreit pointed out, has a terrible run defense. So Tennessee could torch them on the ground.
That was so weird that he pointed that out. I don't know if he was just being informative or he was kind of challenging his old alums. That I wondered that as well, because they're watching, they hear Kirk Herbstreit, and they hear the talk about Ryan Day, and it just made me wonder a little bit aloud is he just trying to get those guys fired up in a subconscious sort of way? Does that make sense?
It's possible. I don't know if Kirk does that as much anymore. But it was weird that he said it because Ohio State's running defense, they were giving up less than 3 yards a game. So I'm like, or less than 3 yards a carry, excuse me, not less than 3 yards a game. That would be insane. But they're giving up less than 3 yards a carry. So I'm like, I'm having a hard time seeing where he says their rush defense is so bad. But at the same time, they did just play.
Well, I think that was actually Booger that said that, just for the record.
Oh, okay. Well,
and I hate calling a grown man Booger, but I think it was Booger. Let's go with Mr. McFarland.
Well, then I need to throw this out the window then, because honestly, his analysis is never the best. But
Herbstreit at one point called him out about that. But let's get back to Tennessee seed, and we're going to have gentlemen. We're live weekdays, by the way, on YouTube or wherever you stream, and you can join us at 10 a.m. each and every weekday. So we've already got plans to have an NFL scout to break down a couple of these matchups that will be in the Tennessee-Ohio State game. We're also going to visit with an Ohio State beat reporter. So we've got a lot going on. But first, just precursory, before we really, really dive into it, what do you think of this matchup against against Ohio State? And don't, aside from Ryan Day, that's the psychological elephant in the room, and we do not know how that really could react. It could go either way.
So I think there's a lot of things working in Tennessee's favor against Ohio State right now. I do think Ohio State has they have quite a few, they have struggled in the trenches recently. And that's kind of funny to say because, you wrote a great column yesterday about the war daddies and the big nasties. But Ohio State, I think you would agree, is the one team that can get the big nasties typically. And
yes, but my argument was, and I hope I illustrated that correctly, I think you can get one or two of them at the Oregons of the world. Not necessarily that. I think you get a little more at the Ohio States of the world. I just don't think you go four deep at most of these schools unless you're in the South.
I mostly agree, but I think Ohio State's the one where you could be able to, but they haven't recently. And I think that's a big advantage for Tennessee. I think the weather, funny enough, favors Tennessee. This is weird to say, but I think sometimes we assume that a team's home elements, home climate naturally benefits their style of play, but that's only if they're constructed to play that way. So we always used to assume, just for an example, in the NFL with Aaron Rodgers, we always used to assume, oh, well, obviously Green Bay wants to play at home because they get the elements. But I'm like, the point I always made was, guys, Aaron Rodgers is not a good cold weather quarterback. He's not in the right place to play at Green Bay. And I think Ohio State doesn't run the right offense for this type of weather. Tennessee does. They run it. They will gash you. And you're right. They go four deep on the defensive line. And Ohio State's got some major issues in the trenches. And my understanding, and just breaking news as we're saying this right now, according to reports, this is going to be a noon kickoff. It's going to be a noon kickoff on Saturday. And I think a lot of this favors.
Not this Saturday.
Not this Saturday, a week from Saturday. A noon kickoff a week from Saturday. And so I think this is, when you look at the fact that Ohio State as pointed out on the message board, they just gave up 200 yards to Michigan on the ground, and Michigan can't throw the ball to save their life. When you look at the fact that their fans want Ryan Day gone, and they almost want a tank to lose Ryan Day because they're so mad about losing to Michigan, I think Tennessee's a lot more excited for this playoff game than Ohio State. I have to be honest with you.
I totally agree, especially if it would be at home. And I've shared with you, our gambling analyst said Tennessee would be a 5.5 point favorite according to his analytics. Now we'll see what comes out with FanDuel and all those other groups, but that it would be an even and a pick 'em, at least the way he sees it, which means if you see a number that favors you, you need to jump on board. Here's the other thing about Ohio State. I want to give you a glimpse of them that I didn't understand, that Kirk Herbstreit just said that they struggled to give up the run. Well, they're number 4 in the Big Ten in giving up the run, and that's a running football league. Pass defense, they are number 1. Rushing offense, they are number 6 in the Big Ten, and passing offense, which is what you would think Ryan Day would do best, right?
Correct.
I mean, he's supposed to be that type of guy. He's supposed to be the throw it around guy. They're number 5. So they're right up at the top of all the Big Ten standings. But what's difficult for me is once you get past Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, I mean, I just think there's a more significant fall off with the top teams in the Big Ten. So I'm giving you all these stats because that's the first look that we have at it. Last look brought to you by Drs. Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. But it's really difficult to determine this team as a whole because I just don't think the Big Ten's good 4 through 18.
No, you're right. I mean, and that was very clear. That was very clear that Indiana was the 4th best team in the Big Ten. And look what happened to them when they played Ohio State. They didn't belong on the same field. I would honestly say, yeah, they're top heavy this year with just 3 teams. I think that could really help Tennessee, who the only reason it could hurt Tennessee, and I'll say this, and we've talked about scheduling imbalance, Dave, and it's not just playing in the Big Ten versus the SEC. It's who you play in the Big Ten versus the SEC. And I think you and I can both agree Tennessee had one of the weaker SEC schedules this year, like significantly so. They play like, I mean,
but here's my issue with that. You've just got to take that from now on. You need to rank the conferences, and from that point forward, that needs to be a moot point. In other words, I don't care if it's Florida, Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, they played an X schedule, whatever you want to call it in the SEC, because you have no control over that draw. Now, if you want to get down on Tennessee for playing Kent State and not playing better opponents to help their seeding, I can roll with that. But I don't see how I understand what you're saying, but I just don't think that conference schedule should be held against you just because Greg Sankey puts a pen to paper and tells you who you're going to play. Good Lord.
No, I'm saying, but we're analyzing Tennessee and Ohio State and seeing who's been more tested here. And what I'm saying is the SEC is deeper than the Big Ten, But Ohio State's conference schedule has been tougher than Tennessee's conference schedule because, yes, you're right, the Big Ten is top heavy. Well, guess what? Ohio State found themselves playing the 3 other top teams in the Big Ten, whereas Tennessee played one of the top teams in the SEC and lost to them. And then they played the 4th best. I mean, Vanderbilt was among the better half of the SEC teams Tennessee played this year. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So yeah, where I'm going with this is to say that SEC is tougher than the Big Ten, but Tennessee's SEC slate was easier than Ohio State's SEC slate or Big Ten slate. It just was, and I think that's why Ohio State.
I won't argue with you that Ohio State should be the home game. I mean, like you pointed out, I got a bigger problem with Notre Dame. We'll get to the poll question as well. Set that poll question up. What is it, Caleb?
Oh, you wanted me to set the poll question up? I apologize.
Well, no, I've already got it up.
You've already got it up? Okay, sorry about that.
Don't give me the answers.
Okay, so are you happy with the Vols seed? Yes or in, 74%. No, horrible draw, 26%. David, looks like fans listened to you last week when you told Tennessee fans to stop whining.
Yep. Your answers coming up. We'll get to those percent. Or did you already give the percentages away?
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn.
The first step to better vision is to visit ccteyes.com. The information you need is easy to access, and setting an appointment is as simple as clicking the tab. Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn, and Eye Care Optical at ccteyes.com.
You know, it's kind of funny when you look at Tennessee's draw, it looks horrible. I mean, you go to Ohio State, and then you play Oregon, who's the undefeated team in the nation, and everybody's number 1. So the draw looks absolutely horrible. However, we mentioned the Ryan Day thing. I still haven't seen Oregon play to the point that I think they're an elite team. And they deserve to be the number 1 team. Don't get me wrong. But I just don't think there's an elite team. I think if you are in the field of 12, that there are previous years where you would have said, oh, gosh, that Alabama and Bryce Young's going to win it. Or, oh, gosh, that Georgia and Stetson Bennett's going to win it. Or, oh, gosh, that Michigan and Jim Harbaugh still in signs is going to win it. But I don't think there's an elite team this year. I think if you're in the 12, you have a realistic shot of winning. And I think that's because of NIL has evened things out. And I think the transfer portal has evened things out. So welcome to the new world of college football. I don't feel like there's a strong favorite on board. You can say Ducks all you want to, but I haven't seen them face a tough SEC team. And I respect the Big Ten, but I don't think it's the same as the SEC.
I think this is why the 8 and 9 and 7 and 10 seeds, there should be no home field advantage, period. If you're that close, it should be a neutral field. I get 6 and 11, 5 and 12. You've cleared yourself. You've done the work you needed to get that higher seed so you get a home game. 8 and 9, though, you're like I said, Ohio State deserves it, but you're splitting hairs significantly. And is it worth the split hairs that we're talking about, Dave? Is that worth Ohio State getting the massive advantage of a home game? Because there's so much parity, like you talk about. The home crowd now, in college football, it used to be worth, for a big time program, I don't know, like even Neyland Stadium, I would say 7 points, or Columbus. I'm adding another touchdown to that because of the parity now. Like, I mean, I honestly think a home crowd is worth 14 points in one of these big time stadiums. The exciting thing, though, for Tennessee, here's an interesting quick stat for you. If Tennessee wins, they would face Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Tennessee's never won the Rose Bowl. That's the one major bowl game they've never won. So they could actually finally get that off their resume. They've been to the Rose Bowl twice. They got shut up by USC both times, once after the 1939 season and another time after the 1944 season. And they should have gone to the Rose Bowl in 2001 after losing to LSU. But I think you and I both know that they probably would have lost to Miami in the national title game that year.
Yeah, probably so. You would have liked that shot. And I think I wonder what that one win in 2001 in the SEC championship game, just being a part of a national championship game, would have done for the program long term. I think it would have had a massive effect. But nevertheless, I think it would help you in recruiting in the whole 9 yards. So let's talk about this big picture for a second. You and I both think, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, you and I both think that Tennessee can go to Ohio State and win, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely they can.
Okay. Let's say they don't. And let's say this is a one and done. Just what happened today, nothing else. This in a vacuum. How big is this for Tennessee football recruiting, the transfers that want to come in? I was doing a little bit of research, and did you know the 2 through 10 team in the rankings of the composite rankings of 24/7 for their most recruiting, their recruiting class lately that just signed? So, and it still could. Guys could still come in. We're waiting on Onus Kanambani. Easy to say. The difference a couple of years ago, okay, was about a whole point from number 2 to number 10. Okay, it was almost a whole point of ratings difference. That's almost a star. Now it's 0.2 of a point. So in my mind, Tennessee has already benefited from being in the college football playoff conversation, and their recruiting class, I will continue to say, was great. Not good, but great. It was that close. And I know it's 7th in the SEC, and I'm not one, please back me on this, I'm not one to blow smoke, Caleb. I just think what this season has done for the program will be felt for years and years and years.
I totally agree with you. You're right. And it's and also just being able to play in certain environments will make it even bigger, because I got it wrong. I have a correction to make, but I'm going to reserve judgment because the times are not being consistent. But now there's a report that Tennessee and Ohio State will be the primetime game Saturday night. So the last game of the first round, pretty much, which makes the most sense. It's Tennessee, Ohio State. That's by far the biggest game you could have in this field, right? In the first round. Like, yes. I don't know, close second.
And did you mention Ohio State's a 7.5-point favorite? That's just coming down FanDuel.
Yeah, I was about to point that out. FanDuel has Ohio State a 7.5-point favorite. What you're saying is totally right about how Tennessee and these teams could easily win, but that's why I don't like that 7 and 10 and 8 and 9 have home field advantage, because they're so evenly matched. You are giving so many points to the home team in this situation, but again, this unique one could help Tennessee, because we'll talk about this later in the week, but I genuinely think there's a chance Ohio State wants to lose this game, and Ohio State fans want to lose this game.
Okay, it's an elimination game. I can't go with you there, but I'll say this: at 7.5, based off the gambling analysts that I talk to, and I don't gamble. Caleb does, but I don't. He told me 5.5 should be the number. So if you want to get on Tennessee now, because that number at 7.5 is going to come back. I can promise you. By the time we do the show on Monday, I can promise you that number is going to be below 7. Guaranteed.
I think some people are saying in their area it's already dropped to 6.5. Looks like a lot of Tennessee fans already put money on Tennessee.
That's really? It's already dropped to 6.5?
Yes. You kind of got to love that, right? So I think, I think that, look, this is going to be a very interesting way to play the game, the way this plays out. It's definitely the most intriguing of all the matchups. I think if you look at the lines, and look, this is just, we talked about this, Dave, but like the way they did the seeding, God, this has to be the only year, right, that they do. Because let me just give you the other lines real quick. Clemson and Texas, 11.5-point line. Indiana, Notre Dame, 7.5. SMU, Penn State, 7.5, just like Tennessee and Ohio State. But I'm sorry, like, I don't think Indiana, Notre Dame, and SMU, Penn State are going to be that close. I think Notre Dame and Penn State are going to win both going to win very comfortably. And I just think that this whole automatic buys for conference champions is turning out to be a disaster, because Penn State has the easiest road by far to the Final Four.
Who do you think has the best odds right now, according to FanDuel, of winning the national championship based off what you've seen?
Well, I kind of cheated because I looked at the best odds.
Okay. It's Georgia plus 350, Oregon plus 360, Texas plus 360, Ohio State plus 480, Penn State plus 600, Notre Dame plus 1,200. Then there's a significant drop to Tennessee plus 2,700. Then you get to Indiana plus 3,900, SMU plus 4,500, Arizona State plus 6,000, Clemson plus 6,000, Boise State plus 6,000. So are you surprised to see a significant drop off from Notre Dame at plus 1,200 to Tennessee, which is kind of like the next tier of those that are doing the odds in Las Vegas? If those two teams played on the neutral side, I'd like Tennessee all day long.
Yeah, they have Tennessee in a tier with the teams that we don't think really belong in this playoff, but only got in because of like auto bids, like Arizona State and Clemson and SMU. So I don't really. I'm not the biggest fan of this. I'm kind of baffled by FanDuel, and I'm with you. Like Notre Dame, I don't know where them at plus 1,200 comes. Them being plus 1,500 better than Tennessee makes very little sense. I get Georgia number 1. I get Oregon number 2. Honestly, I don't think Texas should be tied at number 2 with Oregon. I think at some point you have to write off Texas and say, okay, you have no quality wins, and you couldn't beat Georgia when Georgia had their backup quarterback in. On a
yeah, what
field.
happens if they face Georgia again? They're going to lose to Georgia again.
Exactly. They're going to lose to Georgia again. And because they've done it twice and they got blown out the first time. And I mean, I think we can look at Texas now and say, look, I can just tell you, Texas Twitter, they want Quinn Ewers out of there so Arch Manning can go ahead and start. They're tired of Quinn Ewers. And so I think that this whole setup is kind of interesting. But no, I think Tennessee, it's a brutal road, but I don't think there's any road I don't think any of the roads are much more brutal than any of the other roads this year. Is that fair to say, given the nature of the teams in the playoff?
I'll say going to Ohio State and then Oregon as the second round game. I think that's a pretty rough draw.
It's definitely the toughest. And
but it's football, and in football, unlike basketball, the better team wins 9 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times. So it's not like you're going against a hot shooting team in the NCAA tournament that's just come off 10 straight wins. So it's not like that, but they could have gotten a better draw.
I think the better team in football wins. I agree with you, 8 to 9, but I think in the NFL, it's actually closer to 6, only because the NFL, there's so much parity in the NFL. Teams are so evenly matched. I mean, I don't.
Well, you better get ready because that's what's coming if it hasn't already to college football. Now, when you ask me the same question, that next year at this time, whether or not the better team wins 8 or 9 times, I don't know if that's going to be the case. I'm just telling you the playing field is being leveled as we speak and has been.
Yeah, it has. The playing field is very, very, very level now. And that's why, again, that's the point of the home field advantage, though. It's been I'm not crazy about the home field advantage point for more evenly matched teams because they're so evenly matched teams and they have such similar resumes. I got a question for you, Dave. Would you have rather, and this is an honest question, you're visiting Ohio State. Wouldn't you kind of have rather visited Penn State, though, than Ohio State?
Of course. Yes, because I think James Franklin's playing checkers, and I think other coaches like Josh Heupel are playing chess.
Yeah, I just think Penn State's significantly worse than Ohio State. I mean, I get you didn't want to punish teams for losing the conference championship game, but you should have dropped Penn State below Ohio State. They lost to Ohio State. And so this is going to be a problem with the committee in the future. I wrote this up, and it's up now. Vols are a victim of the committee standard that I don't think the standards make sense, and I don't think there's a way to fix them short of more scheduling balance and not having conference championship games. Because I don't think you can look at Penn State and say that team has a way better resume than Tennessee, but we're not going to punish them because they played a conference championship game. I'm like, well, that conference championship game, that's the only other quality game they played all year, and they lost it, just like they lost to Ohio State.
Listen, I think in retrospect, we're going to look back at this year in the inaugural 12-team playoff, and we're going to say, man, they had like 3 major screw-ups, and they fixed it, and that's great, but yeah, I mean, I'll use this example, and it may be older than some people remember, but strength of schedule was a big deal in the BCS. So what did that lead to? That led to teams running up the score. Well, I mean, that wasn't cool, right? So then they put a cap on it, and they said, oh, only if it's 40 points. And then they eventually took it all away. So this is like me and Caleb get together, and we make a cake. The first one's probably not going to be very good, But hopefully the next one and the next one and the next one will get a little bit better. I don't know if you can bake. I can't.
Yes, that's exactly what this is. You're right. And you hope they kind of figure things out as time goes on. This isn't the messiest tournament we've ever covered in sports, but it's up there. So that's going to be, it didn't make a lot of sense this year. But I mean, bottom line is Tennessee has a very legitimate chance they have the toughest field, but they still have a legitimate chance to advance in that field.
Okay, so we'll have reaction from Josh Heupel on offthehooksports.com. Also coming up, the game that led to this moment. And it's not the Florida game this year. It's not the Alabama game this year. It goes further back than that. An exclusive interview with Cooper Mays told me what game that it was that actually got Tennessee on the upward trajectory that got them to this point. You should celebrate, Tennessee fans. You may not love the draw, but you're in the tournament, and I think you've got a football team that's peaking at the right time, and I think you also are facing a fan base. I don't want to overplay this. I don't feel as strongly as Caleb, but you have a fan base that's a bit in disarray. So we want to be sure and thank our friends at Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Look at me, no contacts, no glasses. Why? Because it's local vision treatment. Last Look brought to you by Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. We'll see you each and every weekday at 10 a.m. on YouTube. So please stop for 1 second and subscribe and turn your notifications on. That's all we ask. We'll have a complete breakdown of Ohio State on Monday. So we look forward to that. He's Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.
The first step to better vision is to visit ccteyes.com. The information you need is easy to access, and setting an appointment is as simple as clicking the tab. Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn, and Eye Care Optical at ccteyes.com.
All right, Caleb, you're going to have to take us out because I've lost my mouse and I can't hit end stream.
All right, you guys have a good one. This is Dave Hooker. I'm Caleb Calhoun. This has been a live presentation of Off